Now, there's a fascinating example recently where the carbon dating got it wrong. And it was really interesting. There was around the late 800s AD, around 870 something or other, there was a group of Scandinavian Vikings had come into Derbyshire in England, and they'd wintered there. And that's a matter of the historical record. People observed it and they wrote it down, so we know that's when it happened. Now, a mass grave was found that had something like 250 to 300 different individuals in this grave, and people did some carbon dating on the bones and discovered that the bones actually dated back a couple of centuries earlier, like around 600 AD. So they were pretty sure these were the Vikings, but something was wrong because there's no historical record of the Vikings being in Derbyshire in 600, but there was an historical record of them being there in the 800s. So this great debate ensued. Were the scientists right? Were the historians right? And the scientists said, no, carbon dating is a wonderful method. It gives accurate results. So they stood their ground, and the historians say, but there's no record of Vikings there in the 600s, but they were there in the late 800s. And then somebody woke up to what the solution was. Turns out the Vikings have a largely seafood diet. Interestingly, fish, shellfish and finfish, have less carbon-14 in them than land-dwelling animals and plants do, simply because of the rate of absorption of carbon into the oceans and various marine effects. So the diet that these Vikings had was actually deficient, if you like, in carbon-14, which made their bones look a couple of hundred years older than they really were.
So their diet affected the carbon-14 date reading?
That's right. So we get a carbon-14 date a couple hundred years earlier than the historical date. But there's a very important lesson that emerges out of this, and that is that the authority always goes to the historical record, not to science. And if you think about it, science is about observing things in the present so we can understand how the universe works. But you cannot observe the past. So in a very real sense, dealing with historical events is actually outside of the competence of the scientist. He has to be able to do repeatable experiments, which are always done in the present. So when you're dealing with the past, the scientist has to make assumptions, like we know the C14 to C12 ratio when that particular specimen died. But maybe we don't, as in the case of the Vikings. So the historical record is always in authority over the scientific result of an experiment when we're dealing with the past.
So Mark, you're saying that when we try and date using carbon-14, we're making a lot of assumptions before we can calculate the age.
That's right. Even with all the efforts to try and limit those assumptions, they're still there, and something can come up that we have not thought about. So history is always the reference point, the historical record. Now, I believe that in the Bible we have a written historical record of what God did right from the very beginning of creation, which is why the Bible's record of history is the authority, I believe, and we need to apply that to all of our scientific thinking when we're addressing things in the past.
If you've enjoyed watching this, you're going to want to check out the Creation Answers book, packed with biblical answers to over 60 important questions about creation, evolution, and the Bible. And if you want to get a copy of the free ebook, follow the link in the description.